I've chosen Dubai for its outdoor activities. It's a luxurious lifestyle. There's so much to do out here.
It's secure, it's safe, it's a great schooling system.
We wanted something with lots of green open spaces where our children can go out and play.
دبي أفضل فرص لأي شخص من أي جنسية.
The beaches are really nice. The infrastructure out here is next level.
Dubai offers tremendous potential for real estate, and you can be sure that you can get a good return on investment. I would say currently it's a good market to buy a property.
It's a great place for a family, and it's a great place to invest overall.
أنا سعيد جدا لامتلاك منزل في دبي، ومتأكد أن دبي المكان الأفضل للاستثمار.
It's definitely the place to be.
دبي بيت الثاني.
Greetings, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Salam. My name is Karen Pizon, and I'll be your MC for today. I welcome you all to the 5th edition of Invest in Dubai webinar series, a platform focusing on real estate investment, where we will discuss all the various reasons that Dubai is the investor's chosen destination. Invest in Dubai Real Estate is a joint partnership between the Dubai Land Department and the International Property Show, a global platform which bestows a gateway allowing growth for investors, business owners, financial service providers, government sectors, real estate, and many others, bridging the gap between those seeking growth of their businesses for long-term rewards and reaping the potential benefits. The topic for today's webinar is Understanding the Real Estate Legislations in Dubai. This session will discuss Know Your Rights for Real Estate Investors and Buyers, foreign ownership laws and designated areas for foreign ownership, ease of setting up businesses in UAE, new laws developed during the pandemic, and offering commercial and legal solutions to clients. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you experience any issues with your audio or video during the webinar, just refresh your browser and that should take care of everything. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please do feel free to post your questions in the chat box, as we will have a round for speaker at the end of the presentation. And so today we are joined by Mr. Edward Pito Nidalku, partner and head of arbitration department, Al Safar and Partners. And Mr. Nidalku is assistant attorney with an extensive background in international law, focusing mainly on the ADR mechanism. Mr. Edward, are you there? Yes. Our second speaker.
I am. Yes.
Yes. Our second speaker is Ms. Marwa Al-Siyabi, corporate associate, Square Patton Books. Her experience includes advising clients on cross-border M&A, equity capital market transactions, joint ventures, and restructuring in the Middle East. Ms. Marwa.
Hi.
And our third speaker, Mr. Scott Houghton, partner of Square Patton Books. Mr. Scott has a wide-ranging practice with a broad mix of clients both locally and internationally. He has considerable experience in acting for employers, contractors, consultants, and founders. Let us begin our session. And so, Mr. Edward, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much in the first place, esteemed member of the audience and Your Excellency. Thank you for the opportunity of actually inviting me to become one of your speakers. We're just going to go pretty much, straight at the chase. We all know what Dubai means. Most of us, we're expats in here. You're probably looking at over 100 nationalities that they call it Dubai home. And of course, the government of Dubai and then government of the UAE per se, they just try to make it attractive for the expats, and for such reason, they develop a fantastic framework, a legal framework that's actually meant to help the residents and to help the expats fitting themselves at home. Now I'm actually just going to go to the first slide, which is actually based on our experience from interacting with the investors, speaking with government officials. So I'm just going to read the first. It's more a little bit about a Q&A. I'm going to read the first question. What do the investors should take in consideration prior to purchasing a property in Dubai? Well, I think this is actually a question that most of the investors, they're asking themselves, does it really matter in which jurisdiction they are located? So before signing a SPA, as we call it in our legal field, which translates as a sales and purchase agreement. I apologize. It is prudent actually to visit the location to get a better idea of the property. And that allows basically the investor to have a better understanding, to see if there's any hidden obstacles, such as nearby construction, the neighborhood, or eventually any high maintenance costs that they haven't been initially contemplating. So at the same time, it is actually very important to check the developers or the real estate agent's reputation and make sure there's no pending legal issues that could really affect the property per se. So now I'm just going to go ahead and move to the next slide. All right, fantastic. Second in here. So can overseas-based investors purchase the property in the UAE? Absolutely. The simple fact that the investor is not in the UAE doesn't mean he or she cannot purchase the property. Basically, proven that an individual power of attorney is being granted through a third party, a property could easily be purchased via this method. Now, this also applies not to the natural persons or individuals, but also apply to the companies. When it comes into the company, it's a little bit more of a complicated process in the way that the investors, they have to gather more documents, such as the company trade license. Depending of the jurisdiction in which you're located, basically will be certificate of incumbency. I know this actually applies to Hong Kong. Of course, the memorandum of association, any documents that actually it's reflecting who has the power to sign on behalf of the company. Of course, additional documents they being required, such as the passport copy of the stakeholders. And it's very important to actually keep in mind that depending on the jurisdiction, a certain set of documents, those documents, they have to be attested by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in that specific country, eventually the Ministry of Justice, run by the UAE embassy in the country, and then at the end, in Dubai, they have to be attested by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or MOFA, as we call it here. Then, of course, it's understood that all the documents that they come in any other language that is Arabic, they have to be effectively translated in Arabic. And I'm going to go with the very last question on this slide. How long does it take to register a property in Dubai? This is actually the fun part, because registering a company in Dubai with the Dubai Land Department before the COVID-19, sure, the people, they were just going there in person. Now it actually can be done through the Dubai Land Department's application. Usually takes 30 to 45 minutes to register the property. That's of course proven that all the documents, they have been supplied, and there's no really any financial institution involved. If we can actually go to the next slide, I will appreciate it. All right. It is allowed for a corporation to own a property in Dubai. Sure. Nonetheless, we're going to have to keep in mind that while the foreign corporations, they're not allowed to own a property in Dubai, that could easily be overcome by actually opening a subsidiary in one of the free trade zones approved by the Dubai Land Department. The best part about actually opening a free zone company does not really require a partnership, making it very easy for the investor or for the foreign national to set up their own business. Then, of course, when it comes down to the mainland companies, then those companies, they actually being registered directly with the Dubai Land Department. It's what we call the LLC, and usually there is need for a sponsor, unless if the person who's setting up the company, it's coming from one of the GCC countries. And actually, that's going to take me to the next point, in which we'll be speaking about the GCC nationals and the foreign nationals. As we mentioned before, anybody is allowed to actually own a property in Dubai, while the UAE nationals and the GCC nationals can actually own a property anywhere in the Emirate of Dubai. The non-GCC nationals, they can own a property in what is we call here as special designated areas, also well known as the free zones. Now, the difference per se, it's that the foreign nationals, I'm just going to recap this, the foreign nationals, they can own a property anywhere else in the designated free areas, with no time restrictions or up to 99 years. This is something that we will actually see later on during the presentation. When I'm mentioning a cap of 99 years, usually this applies to the leasehold. And that actually applies to all the companies registered in one of the free zones. Further on the next slide, it's a small description of the designated areas for for the individuals and companies ownership, the non-GCC nationals. If you're actually looking at the names, the people that are familiar with Dubai, they will see that most of the areas they included there, such as the AFC, downtown Dubai, the Greens, Meadows, Bon Jumeirah. So it's a pretty broad area in which the foreign nationals they can own a property. Now, this list that it's being presented on the screen right now, it's constantly being updated. So we always advise the investors that they should always check with the Dubai Land Department prior to entering into an SPA. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and we'll be speaking something about what's called the residency visa. This type of residence visa applies to all the properties that they value at 1 million dirhams and above. For the ones that they're not familiar with the conversion in the dollars or euros, I would say close to $300,000 or close to 250,000 euros. So the visas are actually being granted to the investors, to the qualified investors, and it's renewable every 3 years for all the properties that are being owned in Dubai. Now, this visa could be renewed as long as the investors keep the property under its name. And I have to admit, the process it's extremely fast. As I said before, COVID-19, I was actually accompanying some of the clients. We went to the Dubai Land Department. You just need to present a copy of the title deed along with the original and required documents. The Dubai Land Department, what it does, they conducting the due diligence process, and once the investor passes the due diligence, now they are able to apply for the residency permit. Now, this is a process that could take 24 to 48 hours, now depending on the complexity, and everything is being done literally in-house. I would say, back before COVID-19, including the visa, it's actually being stamped on the passport within this time frame. The only thing that actually takes a little bit longer, it's the Emirates ID, which normally it's being shipped to a registered address in Dubai. Now, it's worth mentioning that actually being an investor under this category does not really granting the investor to work in Dubai. Nonetheless, they're able to get an Emirates ID. They're able to opening up a bank account, including getting a driver's license, or eventually sending the children to a local school. A very important point in here is that the off-plan properties, they do not qualify for the investors' visas, as the law per se stipulates that the investors should be able to move in immediately after the purchase. As I mentioned, the legislation is actually being currently redrafted, so it's important that the investors they always check in this information prior to entering into an SPA. If we're so kind to actually, I believe to move to we're still on the property visa. This is actually a very well-known free zone, also known as the AFC, or Dubai International Financial Center. And the AFC actually has a unique legal framework. It's besides ADGM in Abu Dhabi, this free zone has its own legislative system, which is based on the British common law, including they have their own courts, which they are completely independent, having full control over all the matters arising out of all the DAFC disputes or any institutions or companies registering the DAFC. Now, when it comes to the property leasing in the AFC, it falls under the DAFC property law number 2007, which was the initial property law. Later on has been amended. We're going to actually see at the end of the slide. It's called the tenancy law, which is based entirely on the common law provisions. So if you're familiar to the UK system, this is very, very similar to it. Now, a big difference when it comes down to the DAFC, that unlike most of the other free zones, and where Dubai Land Department is the one that it's issuing the title deed, it's actually the DAFC authority that, prior to running a background check, let's say on tenants, or in this case on the property, on the potential buyers. So once everything checks, it is the DAFC authority that is allowed to issue the title deed, compared to the rest of Dubai, where actually is the Dubai Land Department issuing the title deed per se. Now, it is also very important to mention that DAFC and Dubai Land Department, they enter into memorandum of understanding in which effectively the DAFC-based companies, they can own a property outside of DAFC, of course, following certain formalities. And if we're so kind to go ahead and just move to the seventh slide. All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a rundown and speak about freehold and leasehold. Now, in 2007, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President, Prime Minister, and the ruler of Dubai, issued a decree allowing the foreigners to own properties in the freehold designated areas. Now, this particular instrument allows the owners to have absolute domain over the property, including the land that it stands on. So the freehold contract, it has to be registered with the Dubai Land Department. And it's not limited to 99 years that we're going to see, as we're going to see later, but it's literally applicable in perpetuity, which gives the owner full domain of the property. They can just literally dispose it at their own discretion. Now, it's worth mentioning that the fees for the registration is actually 4% of the total value of the SPA. And this 4%, we will come back on this 4% later on. It's paid in equal parts, 2% the buyer and the 2% for the seller. We're staying on the same slide, and we're moving to the leasehold. So leasehold, it's actually the opposite of the freehold. While we are talking about the ownership of the property, the leasehold literally ranges between 10 to 99 years. And it gives the buyer the right to the property, but not to the land that it's actually been owned. It's being built on. Including the leasehold, property ownership could be renewed of the expiration of the 99 years, and probably quite a few of them did. You ask yourselves, like, well, am I going to leave this long? Let's say, I'm 40, I just bought a property. Am I going to renew the property when I'm going to be 130 years old? Well, first off, I really wish that everybody would live this long. Nonetheless, this is the time frame that is being imposed, and the owners, they have actually the possibility of reselling it throughout this time, or eventually passing on to their immediate family. The similarity between the leasehold and the freehold, that effectively the leasehold has to be registered before the DLD, as we call it, or the Dubai Land Department, and actually the registration, it's the same 4% as in the case of the freehold. We're going to be moving to the slide number 8, and we will be speaking about it's a term in Arabic, qud, that actually means contract, and it's used for off-land properties. And its main purpose actually, is to register the contract between the buyer and the developers, which actually determines that the property is in its initial stage, or this could also be registered throughout the construction process. We're just gonna move to not to the next slide, but to the next point on the same slide, which is usufruct. Now, there's questions: do we have to register usufruct, and what's the difference between the leasehold? Well, the usufruct normally it's actually limited to 50 years, and that is the main distinction. And I'm just going to read it. It's a legal term. It's a right given to the individual, regardless if there is a GCC national or a foreign national. And it's being given the right to actually enjoy the property of the individual that it's giving the right, providing that the property remains in its initial state or condition. As I said, It could be up to 50 years, depending on the agreement between the two parties. Could literally range up to 99 years without, very important, without making any alteration to the property. Now, the usufruct, same as the leasehold, same as the freehold, and same as Musataha, has to be registered with the Dubai Land Department, and actually it ranges at 2% of the value of the contract. So the next one, what is Musataha? It's commonly granted to the real estate developers, and it's similar to the usufruct, but as you can see on the slide, it actually applies to the land. It gives not the ownership of the land, but it gives the opportunity of exploiting the land, which belongs to a third party, and building on that land. Compared to the usufruct, actually, it still has to be registered, but of a lower value, which is only 1%. Now we're going to move to the next slide, the ninth slide, which actually speaks of the real estate fees. So we already covered actually the part in which the real estate fees, they're very clear. They are applying to every single contract, and depending of the agreement, depending of the value. But for instance, for a sales and purchase agreement, it is a 4%, which has to be paid in equal parts, as I mentioned, 2% the buyer, 2% the seller, while the usufruct and Mustaha, the fees are 2% and respectively 1%. Now, this is actually a question that we came across many times. As you all know, in 2019, Dubai and actually UAE, they have implemented what is called VAT. So the VAT in UAE, compared to other countries, it's quite low, and it's a 5% actually of the total value. Now, the big difference is when a investor buys a property, as long as the property maintains its residential purpose and it's not a commercial purpose, they don't have to pay the 5% VAT, except actually in the commissions and the government fees that they're arising out of the purchase. While the commercial properties, they are always required to pay VAT. Doesn't really matter if they're off land or not. Now, the very interesting part, I came across this question before. What happens when a property it's actually of a mixed use? So it's very simple. The commercial part, the plot that is actually being used for commercial purposes has to pay 5% of that, while the residential part doesn't pay. So that kind of like answers this question. And the very last slide actually speaks about the legal frame per se. As I mentioned before, the law number 7, it speaks about the registration per se in Dubai. It describes both the rights of GCC nationals as long as the rights of the non-GCC nationals. The DAFC, which is very important to mention, it was initially issued in 2007. That speaks about all the aspects surrounding not just the lease, but the purchase as well, which later has been amended in 2018. And I believe I'll be more than actually we do have another slide, the very last one, and it's regulating the relationship between the landlords and the tenants in the Emirate of Dubai. It's been amended in 2008. There's been a lot of changes actually, and all those changes, they're being kept in mind with the investors' main interest, making it very easy for actually purchasing a property. Let's see, and then the very last one we had initially spoke about, it's determining the areas of ownership of the real estate by non-UAE nationals. I'm gonna give the floor to my next speakers, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions after the slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edward. I would like to call Ms. Marwa, please, for her presentation.
Thank you, Karen.
Just sharing my screen. Can you see it now? Karen, is my screen on the webinar now?
No, it's not showing.
Okay, is it showing now?
Yes, it's showing now.
Sorry, I'm just trying. Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Edward, and thank you, Karen, for your earlier introduction. In the next slides, I will be talking about an overview of doing business in the UAE and the efforts introduced by the government over the past years with regards to attracting foreign investment. As mentioned, there have been extensive efforts by the UAE government to diversify the economy and increase contribution from non-oil sectors. In 2019, the Ministry of Foreign Trade reported that the non-oil sector's contribution to the UAE's GDP has increased to almost 71%. In 2020, the Index of Economic Freedom scored the UAE 76.2 out of 100, making it the first Middle Eastern, the first in the Middle East and 18th globally in terms of ease of doing business and having an investor-friendly environment. Overall, foreign investors have the option of setting up business entities in mainland UAE, also known as onshore, or in one of the free zones. My next slides will briefly talk about the two options, the viable legal forms within the two options, and the advantages of setting up, whether it's onshore or in a free zone. So starting with UAE onshore, we have the two most viable legal forms under the Commercial Companies Law, which we have seen based on our practical experience, is either the establishment of a branch of a foreign company or a limited liability company with a foreign shareholder. The factors to be taken into consideration when choosing the legal form depends on the nature of activities to be undertaken by the entity in the UAE, as there are some restrictions on what a branch can do. So we will look at whether the proposed activities fall within the trade sector, or are they services based, or is the entity merely acting as a representative office on behalf of the parent company. The other point is the geographical scope of operations. Strictly speaking, if an investor is seeking to undertake commercial activities in more than one emirate, then the requirement is to obtain registration from the respective Department of Economic Development in that emirate. The two other considerations are the ownership restrictions and liability of the parent company and the shareholder. Sorry, I'll just stay on the slide. So with a branch is an extension of its parent company, meaning that it does not protect the parent company from the liability arising in connection with the operations of the UAE, and the liability and obligations of the branch will be attached to the liability of its parent company. In comparison, limited liability company is very similar to a private company in other jurisdictions, in the sense that it protects the shareholders from the liability of the company, as it introduces what we call a corporate veil, and any liability of the liability of the shareholders will be limited to the proportion of shareholding they hold in that company. The one restriction generally applied in terms of limited liability companies is, in the past, there was a requirement for foreign investors to have a local shareholder owning at least 51% of the limited liability company, as the percentage of shareholding of the foreign investor was limited to 49%. That has changed with the introduction of the Foreign Direct Investment Law in 2018 as part of the government's efforts to relax the regulations around foreign investors and attract foreign investors into the UAE. In 2020, in March 2020, the cabinet issued a directive explaining the requirements and the type of activities that could allow foreign ownership above 49% in onshore limited liability companies. But of course, that is subject to satisfying a number of conditions, and the applications will be reviewed by the Foreign Direct Investment Unit that sits within the Ministry of Economy in the UAE. There are about 102 approved economic activities under what is called the negative list, and so long as the proposed activities of the limited liability company falls within the positive list, then the applicants could apply for an exemption under the FDI to own more than 49% in the limited liability company. Moving to free zones. Free zones are geographical, Free zones are geographical locations within the UAE that were established to attract foreign investors. There are currently about 37 free zones in the UAE, out of which the majority are based in Dubai. Free zones could be sector specific. Each free zone has its own set of rules and regulations when it comes to company setup, the manner in which the company conducts its business, and also matters such as employment and other items that fall within the company's operations within the free zone. The main advantage of free zones in the UAE is that foreign investors are allowed to own up to 100% of companies incorporated in free zones. And similar to onshore, you could either incorporate a limited liability company with one shareholder or more than one shareholder, or you could set up a branch of a foreign company. But of course, the treatment of both entities will depend, from a liability perspective, it's identical to the onshore in the sense that the free zone company's liability would be limited to the shareholder's proportion of shareholding in that specific company, whereas a branch registered in a free zone, with a branch of a free zone company, the liability extends to the parent company. There are certain factors that have to be taken into consideration when deciding on onshore versus a free zone. First, it's the nature and scope of activities. There are specific activities that are limited to onshore entities. And the other thing we should take into consideration is, strictly speaking, a free zone company cannot engage directly in commercial activities on mainland UAE. The other thing to consider is the client base of the entity and where the entity would be operating. The main advantages of setting up in a free zone, as highlighted, there are no foreign ownership restrictions. Foreign nationals and companies may own up to 100% of the shares in a free zone company. The other advantage is that there are no limitations on the nationality of directors, management, or shareholders. Although some free zones require for at least one director to be a UAE resident, the incorporation process is generally quicker and less burdensome than companies or branches registered onshore. We have seen that in response to the COVID pandemic, a number of free zones have really eased their incorporation process. For example, rather than the traditional way of having to notarize and attest the documents abroad before we submit them in the UAE, some free zones introduced a virtual verification system of the for verifying the documents, by which they do it online through one video call with the applicant, whereas in the past, just getting the documents together could take up to 4 weeks. And also they've reduced their fees. So we know one free zone, for example, reduced fees for certain type of offices significantly. And that's basically to support applicants looking or investors looking to enter Dubai and have operations here. The other advantage that we have is that in the free zone is that most of them have a guaranteed tax holiday and unrestricted repatriation of funds for renewable periods of 15 to 20 years. So that's it on my section. I will pass on to Scott now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marwa. Now I think I have to call on Mr. Scott for his presentation.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Marwa. Your Excellency, guests and investors, good afternoon. Thanks, first of all, to the Land Department and to Invest in Dubai for this opportunity. And I only hope that this 10 minutes I've got, 15 minutes or so, I can share something useful with you. Now, Marwa, I believe you may still be sharing your screen.
Yeah, I need to find, sorry. I'm just trying to, okay, I'll need
While we're trying to get that set up, apologies for the...
Sorry about this.
Okay.
I'm trying to, sorry. I'm just trying to figure out how to get out of this, sorry. Okay.
Okay, I think we may be there.
Okay. Sorry.
Zohaib, I would rather share my screen if you don't mind. Thank you. Please just bear with me. And now, Karen, can you just confirm, can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Perfect. Okay, apologies for the slight delay there, guys. Again, thanks to Land Department, Invest in Dubai for the opportunity, and thank you all for tuning in. My topics here, as you see, two topics: new laws introduced during the pandemic and offering commercial and legal solutions to clients. I see these two as effectively fitting hand in glove. There are two items that go together, so I'm going to deal with them together. But that being said, what I'll do is run through some of the initiatives been introduced by the government in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I think it's worth mentioning the initiatives there. And then we'll look at some commercial options that we can all be looking at and considering. And by we, I mean the royal we, but that's all of us, whether we're clients or suppliers or investors looking at solutions. But I think the main point to emphasize and what I want to get out of this is the commitment that's been shown by the UAE government and specifically Dubai government in promoting business in the region and within the Emirate. So what has the UAE done to support business or support the business sector? What we've got here are a number of initiatives introduced generally around COVID. Some of them predate that, and we'll look at each of them. So we've got a Dubai economic stimulus package valued at over 6 billion dirhams. There's the Abu Dhabi economic stimulus package valued at 50 dirhams, but that's part of a larger strategy that we'll look at. Dubai free zones economic stimulus package. Both Edward and Marwa have talked about the free zones, so we'll look at some options there. We'll look at what the banks have done and some things around workforce protection. So the Dubai economic stimulus package, you see that the title there, I've got ×3. There are actually 3 packages. The original package introduced in March of this year was valued at 1.5 billion dirhams. There's a second one at 3.3 billion, and then the third package again a further 1.5 billion. So over 6 billion dirhams committed effectively in the last 6 months. Look at some of the initiatives introduced, a reduction in custom fees. There's been a 20% cut on import costs, in addition to a 90% cut in the cost for custom documentation process. So substantial cuts here to encourage imports. See a reduction in government and municipality fees in certain sectors, specifically, or most importantly, I think, the hospitality and leisure sectors that felt the full force of the pandemic over the last few months and ongoing. We saw a reduction of costs by DEWA. So DEWA reduced their cost by 10% for a period of 3 months. There was an initiative to expedite payments to the healthcare and construction sectors. These are to encourage prompt payment on government projects. So the healthcare sector, for obvious reasons, under real pressure during the pandemic. And the construction sector, from a personal point of view, I do a lot of work in the construction industry. So, this move was great news to me and to a lot of my clients. But the bigger strategic picture here is that there are so many people involved in the construction sector in Dubai that moves had to be made to keep it rolling. Particularly when you look at Dubai's investment in real estate development and the construction industry generally. In the expedited payments, you're to encourage quick, prompt payment for projects to assist contractors with liquidity and cash flow issues and to facilitate ongoing operations. We also saw a reduction in the cost of license fees for schools. And while I suspect that not many of us are in the education industry here, it is something that impacts most of us here, right? So a lot of families facing pay cuts or job losses. Schools, many of the schools had to cut costs similarly, and this was a government measure to protect schooling and education. Yeah, I've got it on the slide there, further reading. There's an interesting guide produced by the Dubai Chamber, which is worth a look if you're interested, on the Dubai Economic Stimulus Package, which also covers the measures introduced by certain of the free zones. Now, I mentioned Abu Dhabi, and the title of this webinar relates to the UAE, so I want to touch on Abu Dhabi. It's while these are not COVID-related initiatives initially, they have grown into something else. So in 2018, Abu Dhabi announced a commitment of some 50 billion dirhams as part of a strategy aimed at supporting entrepreneurs, SMEs, attracting foreign direct investment, and to create jobs. Now, the timing shows that it wasn't a reaction to the pandemic, but what's happened is we've now seen new initiatives that have rolled into this strategy, and we have specific COVID-related initiatives. Of the 10 original initiatives, some of the key ones for me were the introduction of dual licenses, so allowing businesses to operate both within and outside the free zones. A work from home policy, now this to me is very interesting, as I'm sure everyone on here has become used to the idea of working from home over the last few months. But this was a move in 2018 to encourage entrepreneurs. They were allowing entrepreneurs to register a business without having to invest in a leased premises, a commercial premises. They could work from home. Some COVID-related actions specifically this year in Abu Dhabi. We saw the suspension of real estate registration fees, a reduction in registration fees for industrial land leases, suspension of certain tourism municipality fees. There was a waiver of the requirement for annual registration of commercial vehicles. Again, just a commercial liquidity issue, and a suspension of road toll tariffs, all aimed at the same purpose: facilitating business, maintaining business continuity, and enhancing liquidity. Now, liquidity to me has become one of the buzzwords or one of the most important issues in the marketplace. And I think that predates COVID in many situations. I suspect Edward has seen a similar position as what I'm seeing, that there are an awful lot of disputes out there in the market. However, liquidity is so tight that parties simply can't afford to pay to follow up on those disputes. Often those disputes come from lack of payment. And then as a result of that lack of payment, you cannot afford to employ third parties to resolve your disputes. And it's an ongoing cycle. Thus, the liquidity measures, anything we can do to increase liquidity is a great move. If interested, there's an interesting KPMG report on the stimulus packages worth a look as well. The free zones. So the Dubai Free Zone Council announced its own stimulus package. And the Free Zone Council exists to provide a strategy for the free zones generally and to coordinate between the free zones and the government. The council assists with the overall Dubai strategy and how free zones and onshore Dubai entities work together for the benefit and the betterment of Dubai. So similar to Abu Dhabi package, the free zone stimulus package complements an earlier initiative to reduce business costs and enhance liquidity of the companies within the free zones. We saw deferred rent payments for up to 6 months. Well, that's a massive financial issue right there. They introduced payment plans and payment holidays. There were a refund of security deposits in certain circumstances. Free movement of labour among companies was allowed, and that may not sound like much, but that was very much both a reactive and a proactive move. This initiative allows employees from one company where the company simply cannot continue to pay them, allowed those employees to move to another free zone company without penalty or without undue fees. Free zone specific issues, so the DIFC reduced their real estate transfer fees down to 4%. And there are other specific issues in each of the free zones. I'm not going to look at them all, but if you are in a particular free zone, it's worth having a chat to the authority, the relevant authority, and seeing what initiatives they have in place. A number of the Dubai banks actually work together to introduce relief packages to ease the financial pressures on their customers as a result of the pandemic. The banks involved include, and this is without limitation, Emirates NBD, Dubai Islamic Bank, Emirates Islamic Bank, Mashreq, Commercial Bank of Dubai. They've all got together and worked on initiatives to assist their customers, including reduced charges, reduced finance charges, payment plans and payment holidays, again, introduction of refinancing or restructuring options, and importantly, an increase in the loan to value ratios for property purchases. So increase to 80% for expats and 85% for GCC nationals. So you can see a move by the banks to encourage investment, or at least the holding of investments. And these are crucial to Dubai and really crucial in the real estate industry. Looking at some initiatives for workforce protection, and I debated whether to include this, but these initiatives work to protect both the workforce and the companies to facilitate ongoing commercial operations. So the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization, or MORA as many people call it, launched the National Programme for Labour Market Stabilisation. Now, there were a number of parts to this, but some of the key points that were included were the lifting of restrictions, preventing workers from acquiring new work permits. So again, looking at free movement of workers. The launch of a virtual labour market, an online platform for both job seekers and recruiters. Allowed a reduction of working hours. I generally went with a reduction in pay as well, but that is saying to companies, look, we can reduce your outgoings, but equally we've got to look after the employees. There was a limit in the capacity of workforce transport. So this was a move whereby worker transport buses could not take more than 25% of the seating capacity. And this was one of the first moves introduced. And again, I work in the construction industry. And I know of one very large site where on the first day this was introduced, there were queues and tailbacks of miles. And buses were delayed by hours because of this new move. We had security checking every single bus and checking the numbers on each bus, which delayed the time to get in and out through the site gate. This was a monstrous site with hundreds, if not thousands, of labour buses on the road. And you can imagine the chaos that ensued. But the principle was right, protecting people, protecting human capital, and trying to keep the business moving. They also included rules or guidance on paid and unpaid leave to select categories of employees. Again, the Chamber of Commerce guide is worth a look if this is of interest to you. So that covers the rules and initiatives rolled out in both Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. But turning now to the more commercial solutions that we should all be considering in terms of both our own businesses and the businesses of our clients. The first point here, I think, has been very interesting to me as a lawyer, that Dubai courts have shown a reluctance to make enforcement orders. Now, since the start of the pandemic, I think the Dubai court system has dealt really well with the situation, gone to online hearings, which has streamlined the process, seems to be much more efficient. And I suspect there may be, once we come out of this altogether, I think the online hearings will probably continue. But the reluctance to make enforcement orders, where, for example, I have a judgment against company A, the courts have been reluctant to actually execute on that, whereby I am physically freezing their assets or taking their money, in recognition of the commercial reality of the current situation. They're not saying we won't enforce, they're just showing a reluctance to make enforcement orders now. I suspect we'll see that change over time, but for the time being, there has been a slowdown in enforcement, shall we say. I think it's important to recognise that we're not out of the woods here. There may well be more pain to follow in terms of both a commercial sense and a more holistic or medical sense. So we need to exercise patience with our clients, patience with our suppliers. I have always encouraged transparency, but even more so now, let's be open and honest with each other. We're all in this together, and if we can understand each other's pain, then we can share the pain and we can find a solution that gets us all through this. Lawyers are always taught or always told in business development terms to invest in your clients. But I think that's something we should all be doing, investing in our clients and our suppliers and the whole supply chain. And I mean, investing human capital, invest time in them, understand each other's businesses. If you understand that business and the pain points, you can come up with a solution that works. For most of us here, I suspect the key at the moment is pulling together and getting through this. A situation that we've never been in before, that we've never seen. We need to be in this together to get through it, which I think has been exemplified by the government measures introduced. It's also worth remembering that, and without being cynical, which is a criticism often leveled at lawyers, there are opportunities out there. With every downturn, there comes opportunity. Nowhere is that better exemplified than in the real estate space. Okay, there will be opportunities. So keep your eyes open and be flexible. We need to be flexible. Okay, be willing to adapt and embrace change. So embrace change, embrace the new norm. Whether we like it or not, things have changed. The world has changed and will continue to change. We've seen that remote operation works. I personally was not one for working from home. I found it very difficult. However, when forced upon me, settled into it, and you know what, it works. I found myself to be considerably more productive at home. So I think we'll see remote operation continue. I think there's a lot to be said for being in an office environment with your colleagues in terms of planning, business development, etc. But I come back to that word flexibility. We have to be willing to adapt, willing to change. Flexible solutions, I think, are probably the way forward. Reduced overheads, I think we'll see reduced overheads. Commercial landlords at the moment are definitely feeling some pain. And when we all return to a normal, the new normal working environment, will we see a reduction in office space? Will we need the same amount of office space, resulting in a reduced overhead for the company? AI, artificial intelligence, this predates COVID, of course, but it's advancing at such a rate now that I think we should all be looking at AI solutions. How can it help us? How can it help our clients? It's work smarter, not harder. Work better. There are solutions there that work for us all, or can work for us all, and we should embrace them. So, and finally, here comes a lawyer in me. Read and understand your contract. No matter what the situation, always have to read and understand the terms of your contract. Then when things go wrong, you know where you stand. The purpose of a contract in many ways is the allocation of risk. It's understanding your risk profile, what risk you're accepting, and what happens if that risk event occurs. I am so often approached by clients that ask me a specific point relating to their issue. I say, okay, what does your contract say? I don't know is often the answer. We need to understand our contracts. Do not just blindly sign something. And again, in the real estate industry, it's a massive issue. SPA is a massive, heavy document, but you need to understand the key terms of that document and what happens if, what are the ultimate or likely outcomes. And just as a disclaimer, understand the rules specific to your industry or your sector. What I've talked about here is not specific to a particular industry or sector, but is general. So have a look. If you're in a free zone, have a chat with the authority. Speak to the DED, speak to the land department, understand what the rules relating to you are. Okay, so I apologize if I've gone over a little. I will hand back to Karen, who can deal with the Q&A, but thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Mr. Edward and Ms. Marwa, we will go ahead after for the time of questions and answer, and thank you for the insightful presentation. We actually received loads of questions and we have a few minutes left, but ladies and gentlemen, we're unable to answer the questions. Our speaker will answer and address all these questions after the webinar, and we will send you the response via email. Let's proceed to the question. Can I have Mr. Edward for the first question?
Absolutely, go ahead.
If someone had already purchased the first property in Dubai as an individual, what is the minimum down payment she needs to put for buying a second property in Dubai? 20%, 40% of the total property value?
Well, first off, we're going to have to find if they're a resident of Dubai. By default, if he already has a property, and I'm assuming it's over 1 million dirhams, they are a resident. It relays on the agreement that it's going to have to the bank. As Scott was actually saying, right now, it's been raised to 20%. That, well, actually lower to 20% down payment. So it depends on each bank in particular. And of course, I'm guessing that probably the first property could be used as a mortgage, as a collateral. Normally, in a market, especially during these days, that the down payment is 20%. I did see 15% as well, but this is something that I don't really have to be quoted on.
All right. Thank you. Shall I proceed to Ms. Marwa? Ms. Marwa, your question is, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the process protection to foreign investors where they continue to make installments for off-plan properties according to sale, purchase agreement, but the real estate developers does not build the property or substantially delay, but makes the investor pay according to the prior agreed terms? Is there any legal framework to challenge on the basis of fairness of terms?
Sorry, I think we need to go back to Edward. He can cover that point, I believe. Sorry.
So Edward can do this cover, yeah? Mr. Edward?
If you're so kind, yes, just repeat the question for me. Thank you.
Yes. What is the process protection to foreign investors where they continue to make installments for off-plan properties according to sale purchase agreement, but the real estate developer does not build the property or substantially delay, but makes the investor pay according to the prior agreed terms? So is there any legal framework to challenge on the basis of fairness in these terms?
I mean, I'm going to speak in general terms. Of course, the investors, they have to be protected. Usually when a master developer, they start building the construction, they have to put the money in an escrow account. Depends at which point in time the construction is. For instance, I'm not sure if it's a 20% or a 50% or 60% or 70%. Of course, there's mechanisms that they will protect the investors. But I think the most important part, actually, as Scott was saying, it lays in the sales and purchase agreement. Usually the mechanisms, they are in there, including what happens in case of a default by the buyer, or in this particular case, what happens in case of a default by the seller.
All right, thank you. Shall I move on to Mr. Scott, I guess, because more of that is really correlated to three of you. But then, Mr. Scott, are you mentioning the protection for customers who are buying off plan, or let's say you sign one floor plan and then you get different floor plans? So do customers know about legal aspects of things like happening in Dubai?
That's a great question, Karen. And I think it comes back to the same point. Edward and I are singing from the same hymn sheet here, that what does your contract say? What does your contract say about the size of your unit? Now, that said, there is law in place around this, and the law is if your unit is smaller than that which you agreed to buy by 5% or less, is termed de minimis. It doesn't matter, and you'll get no recovery there. However, if it is more than 5% smaller than that which you contracted to buy, you're entitled to a pro rata reduction in price. Okay, so there are rules in place around that, and there are also strict rules in place about the measurement of units in accordance with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors guidance on measurement, which the Land Department has implemented.
Yes, thank you. Perfect. I think we have a general questions for the three of you, much better. You all can relate when it comes to trust, because this is very important actually in every aspect. So there are many consultants, lawyers out there who help investors and buyers in purchasing property. How can we find the right one or trust the right one? So I would like to hear from the three of you. Can I call Ms. Marwa first on the stage? Let's hear her knowledgeable trust.
So I think the first thing is due diligence and making sure that you approach the right agents based on their reputation, credibility. You make sure you ask the right questions and get enough comfort in terms of their knowledge, what they're trying to sell, and then you look at the developer's portfolio as well, and you get comfort there.
Perfect, very nice answer. Mr. Edward, can I hear from you, please?
Sure, I will be using actually a medical term in which I will say that I concur with Ms. Marwa. And nonetheless, it's very important to mention the fact that on the Byland Department's website, there's the list of approved developers. But yes, even in those matters, it's very important that somebody does his due diligence. Same thing, go and visit the property, go and visit the site, see how many projects have been initially developed by the developer, for how many years have they been in business. Those are the things that all the investors they have to keep in mind.
Yes, a lot. Mr. Scott, what you?
I concur thrice. Yeah, I think the key is obviously due diligence. Understand who you're getting into a relationship here with. But what I think we should all be striving for is finding that trusted advisor, someone that you have to invest time in them. You've got to understand them. Particularly with a real estate purchase, for many people, this will be the biggest investment they make in their life. It's not to be taken lightly. Investigate, as Edward says, check out the land department information. Go see the land department. See some other agents. Shop around. But most importantly on this, what I would say is, until you develop that trusted relationship, do not take anything at face value. Read your contract.
That's very, very important. I've heard it many times. Read your contract. And yeah, everything actually takes time and proper connections. I think we are running out of time. So Mr. Edward, Ms. Marwa, and Mr. Scott, really thank you so much for your time and for wonderful, great webinar. And thank you for joining us today for all our participants. We really, really appreciate you being here. And actually, the speakers will do and address all the unanswered questions via email. So to download today's presentation, please visit our website, www.iadubai.ae. And we will also be sending an email to get back your feedback on today's webinar with a link to download the presentation. And we're also conducting a short survey to get your feedback on today's webinar. And the link to the survey will be shared via the chat and via email. And so follow us on our social media channels to keep yourself updated. Thank you once again, wonderful speakers and our participants. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Likewise, and everybody stay safe.
Stay safe. Bye.